Welcome in, everyone, to the first Fielding the 68 of the 2024-2025 season. It is great to see all of you here. Paul Fritschner, Kevin Sweeney, Rocco Miller, and this is presented by Rhythm. This is the Field of 68, and like I said, we are fielding the 68. We are 55 days away from Selection Sunday, and it is never too early to talk some bracketology. We're going to get right into it. We're going to talk about everything today. We're going to talk about the top seeds. We're going to talk about the bubble teams, and the bubble is huge right now because there's so much yet to be determined. We're going to talk about teams that still have work to do, teams that are looking good, all of that and more. We're going to be taking chat questions from the YouTube chat, so if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you send us your questions in. We'll try to talk about your team and everything else. Rocco, I'm going to start with you. How are you feeling? Is the blood moving now that we're getting back into bracketology season?
Paul, awesome to have you on the show. Welcome aboard. Kevin, great to see you again. I got the opportunity to do the exercise twice last week and then a third time here today, starting to get back into the rhythm as this show is brought to you by Rhythm. I'm really just enamored with the SEC situation. We'll talk about that a lot today on both fronts, both at the top of the bracket and in the cut line part of the bracket. And I think the matchup side of it with bracketing has created a lot of complications, so we'll probably touch on that as well. But otherwise, I think the big picture this year with the super conferences, of course, the first year without my beloved Pac-12, has created just a surplus of a vacuum really at the top three leagues, the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12, that there's not even that many bids left over for leagues, even like the ACC and the Big East. I think that's the big story, and it's honestly quite frustrating with 31 great conferences that almost all these leagues are dead for multi-bid hopes. But other than that, I'm fired up, man.
Kevin, you're just on the show last night. You get some sleep. I don't know where in the world you are right now, but you're looking good. How you feeling here coming into the show?
I'm good, man. It's been fun. It's good to get back on the saddle bracket wise, and good to start thinking about these things, right? Like I think early in the year, one of the things I said last night on After Dark was, early in the year, sometimes it's just like, oh, that's a big win. What a step. And you look back now and like those wins have huge weight, even the games in November and December that at the time maybe didn't feel so consequential. They certainly do now. And they will get even more consequential as we head towards Selection Sunday.
Sure. So you talk about consequential wins. Let's start with that right off the top. 19 of the AP's top 25 teams last week lost. It was a chaotic week, especially over the weekend. So Rocco, how do you look at what happened over the past week, and especially this weekend? You saw, Iowa State going down in Morgantown. A lot of these top teams losing. Gonzaga lost back-to-back games. Where do you see last week, and how does it play all into your field?
Yeah, welcome to college basketball. It's been going on for years. It's going to continue to happen throughout the rest of the year. I think what I always tell college basketball community at large, whether it's coaches, fans, whoever it might be that's interested, you can't really overreact to one result, especially at the highest level, because at the end of the year, you're basically judged the same, whether the game happened on opening night or on the last day of the season, heading into conference championship week. So the way I process it is, obviously those were big significant results, whether you want to talk about Iowa State's loss, Gonzaga, of course, the big story in the West, losing to Santa Clara at the Kennel, giving up the most points in the history of the Kennel, and Oregon falling to Purdue at home. That hurt them a little bit. Baylor at the end of the weekend, late last night, took a surprising home loss to TCU. I thought that was very damaging today in their case. But what you're doing each time, and it always kind of surprises me because you can't help yourself as somebody that observes the game and watches it to think, oh, that's going to kill them. And you see a lot of overreactions on social media that way. But the reality is you still got to go back and start your process over as a bracketologist, always from scratch, and take a clean set of eyes on the situation. And sometimes, that those losses don't hurt as bad as you think. Baylor's, it actually hurt quite a bit more. So it's always a grain of salt approach at first, and then you figure out the truth the next morning. That's kind of my advice and my reaction to the direct results that we saw.
All right, let's get into it here, and let's talk about your number one seeds, Rocco. Let's talk about the teams that you feel like have positioned themselves well enough to earn the top 4 seeds into the NCAA tournament. Who would you have as those 4 number one seeds right now?
Yeah, certainly Auburn as the top seed. 8 or actually up to 9 wins now against tournament level competition. I believe 8 of those are in quad one, completely dominating the space, whether you want to talk about resume or predictive metrics. Basically everything you would ever want to see in a number one seed, Auburn has it. And, and right next to them now is Duke. Duke more in a sense of their strength, in the predictives, they're right next to Auburn. And then there's a nice little gap between them and the third team. And Duke really, besides the 2 slip-ups, and those were not bad losses by any means, have been exceptionally dominant. But Duke does have to be careful playing in the ACC. Any loss in that league most likely could sink them off the one line quickly because they don't have another team that's in the top 24 on my what we call a seed list. So, they would take a loss from now on to anybody 25 or worse, unless you're thinking about that Illinois game coming up February 22nd, a little early for that one. On the third number 1 seed line is going to be Alabama, and mainly because they just have Herculean road wins at Kentucky, Texas A&M, North Carolina, neutral court wins against Houston and Illinois, 2 metrics darlings. So they just have powerful wins. 5 wins in quad 1A is either tied for or is the most in the country. And, they schedule like maniacs, and they always will with Nate Oates. And that, of course, is benefiting them big time. So when you looked at – I also took a look at Tennessee and Iowa State. Alabama was clearly above those 2. And I did go with Tennessee over Iowa State for the 4th number 1. It was fairly close, but I think when it comes back to the old committee principles of who did you play, where did you play, and how did you do, Tennessee's road wins at Illinois and a growing road win at Louisville, as that team is red hot, and a road win at Texas is solid. Neutral court win over Baylor. A lot of good damage away from home for Tennessee, whereas Iowa State had to rally for their only real significant win away from home against a tournament-level team, and that was at Texas Tech. Some of the teams they beat looked like tournament teams like a week ago, and now they're not. And they only have 4 overall wins against the field to Tennessee's 5. Beyond that, they have equal Tennessee and Iowa State are equal quad 1 wins. And besides those things, but the extra oomph of winning at Illinois and Louisville for me is giving the Vols the nod.
So, Kevin, before I get to you on your thoughts on those 4 teams, Rocco, I want to ask you this, and we're going to do a whole segment on the SEC in the third block of this show. But for right now, just since you brought it up with these top 4 seeds, one of the things that I was talking about when I hosted After Dark on New Year's Day was the likelihood or what the likelihood would be of the SEC to potentially get 3 of the top 4 seeds. Could the SEC get 3 number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament? And there's still a lot left here, right? But Florida has looked very strong. I think maybe Florida's looking still for a couple of those like really marquee wins when you talk about what Alabama's done this year. But you have 3 right there. How likely do you think it is that the SEC can hold on to 3 of those 4 spots?
Yeah, they also have Florida in the mix too. They're sick on how you look at it, but I think it's probably almost a coin flip right now, and we have seen it with the ACC before. I can't remember the exact year, but we had Carolina in there. Anyway, there was 3 ACCs towards the 2019 timeframe, and so it's not unprecedented. This SEC is also unprecedented as a league. If these teams continue to be the clear top 3, which you can see they are so far, and they perform that way the rest of the way, they should be there. And there's really nothing against it. So that's the way I look at it. But, of course, if Tennessee has a bad week, Alabama has slipped up already with their home loss to Ole Miss. If that continues and they end up with 5, 6, 7 losses at the end, it's probably just going to be a little bit too much to stay on the 1 seed line. But obviously if they stay 4 losses or less, they're probably all in good shape.
Kevin, your thoughts on those 4?
Yeah, look, I would make a case for Iowa State. I know, Rocco said it's very close right now between them and Tennessee. I look at Iowa State, I see a slightly better average in the resume metrics, a slightly better average in the quality metrics, and then those 9 quad 1 and 2 wins, which is a really strong number this early. And obviously, again, this is a snapshot in time. We've got a long way to go, but they'll have plenty more opportunities to bolster that. And again, I think long term, I think what you're watching for is that balance between, yes, the SEC is the best conference, and so you're going to have tons of opportunities for huge wins. But at the same time, you're also going to lose games because you're in such a grueling conference. And the question will be is how does the committee value those teams as they lose, 3, 4, 5 times in league play, maybe 5, 6, 7 times overall, versus, if an Iowa State can run through the Big 12 or, potentially Purdue runs through the Big 10, right? Like I think that will be what I'm tracking. But yeah, I think right now, certainly Auburn and Duke have created some separation. And then from there, you're going to have, the Bamas, the Tennessees, the Floridas, maybe Kentucky, if they can, just win enough games. They have the top tier wins without question, and battling those against, a potential Big East champion, a potential Big 10 champion, a potential Big 12 champion. That to me will be the interesting story to monitor.
The way that all of this is going right now in the SEC, and then you have Duke mixed in there, how close are Duke and Auburn right now, Rocco?
I mean, they're honestly not terribly close besides the performance part of it. It's going to be where Duke sitting around, if they keep handling their business the way they have been, they'll probably need Auburn to fall maybe 2 times, assuming that Auburn's losses are against top-tier competition in the SEC, not like a lost to a South Carolina LSU level team, because of the fact that Auburn is just piling up pieces of what I call gold or silver with these heavyweight wins. They've got the Iowa State win by 2, which again, that supports Kevin's case for the Cyclones being on the one line. That was a coin flip battle in Maui. But they also have the Houston win, the Purdue win, a win over Memphis, North Carolina, on the road at Texas, and then another road win at Georgia just recently. So they're just continuing to stack and stack and stack. And at a certain point, their sack will be so heavy that Duke will never be able to match that. So it's nothing that Duke's doing wrong. They're just not playing the type of teams that Auburn gets to play once, twice a week.
All right, let's take a look here at the consensus top 4 seeds that we have from the field of 68 in the Fielding the 68 bracket. And here we go. The field of 68's number 1 seeds, you see it right there, Auburn, Duke, Alabama, and Tennessee. Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no huge surprises by any means. Again, I think the margins are very tight. I think, as Rocco said, the road wins for Tennessee are really, really powerful right now, and they overcome a loss at Vanderbilt, a performance at Florida that wasn't particularly pretty when they lose by 30. Right? I mean, a road win at a top 10 Illinois team is one of the better wins anyone has all season, and that will continue to be the case. It is incredibly difficult to win on the road in those types of environments, and for them to have one like that is an incredible feather in their cap. And they'll have all the opportunity ahead, right? I mean, you look at the next stretch for Tennessee, home Mississippi State, that's a quad 1 game, at Auburn, the toughest game of the year for anyone, home Kentucky, home Florida, home Mizzou, who's surging, at Oklahoma, at Kentucky. I mean, it is an absolute gauntlet that they are staring down in SEC play. So again, the positive of that is we could look up here in 2 or 3 weeks and say, Tennessee is a lock or close to a lock on the one line and in that conversation with Auburn and Duke. Or we look up in a couple weeks and say, okay, they lost 3 more times. Meanwhile, Here comes Iowa State. Here comes everyone else.
Yeah. Rocco, let's step back a little bit here since it's the first show of Fielding the 68, and we're kicking all of this off. Can you just take people that are maybe watching this for the first time or haven't gotten into bracketology as much, or maybe their team is performing better than they have in years past and it's finally time to pay attention to bracketology? What are some of the things that you look for when you say that you're seeding teams? And we're going to get into all the nuts and bolts here in the rest of the show. But what are things that you look for? How do you go about assembling your bracketology for these shows and doing this night in and night out?
Yeah, nice broad question, Paul. I'll try to tackle it the best I can, but I think there's 31 leagues, 31 automatic qualifiers, there's 37 at-large bids. So in terms of the top of the sport, going 1 through 64, the cutoff line with the mixture of some really good champions, of course, the top league champions, and a couple other good enough teams that are in there, you're going to cut the line around 45. That's where it is today for me. I have 2 bid stealers in my bracket forecast. So again, if you're in that 40 to 50 range, you're really skating on thin ice, and there's going to be a lot of other categories that separate you from other teams. But the simple process is comparing like teams at all times. And so when you're going through your one seeds, you just trickle all the way down 2, 3, 4 until you get around that cut area, which typically falls near the top of the 11 seed lines. Last year, we had a crazy situation with 5, I believe, bids were stolen, at least 4 were, and we ended up with playing games for the 10 seed line. That was, I think, a first. But yeah, that's typically where it's going to be drawn out. I think the other basic education is everybody gets stuck on the net, which is not a bad thing per se, but it's all about your opponent's net, less so much about yourself. Sneak preview, we'll talk about a UCF team that has a very poor net, but they're beating teams that have really good nets. Kevin's example of Tennessee's road win at Illinois being a high-level elite win, well, the net tells us that that's the 8th hardest road win in the country because Illinois is number 8 in the net. That's where it's important. It's not important for Illinois themselves. It's important to go play a high-level net team and beat them, and obviously become a big fan of that team as the season continues, because that win will either age like fine wine or it could drop into a mid-tier level win later. So that's the simple process of it all. And then from there, you got to take all these teams and build a bracket. So with bracketing, there's a lot of other rules. We don't have time to cover all that. And we're going to run into some SEC scenarios later, so we'll save that for the SEC segment. But with bracketing, there's a lot of different matchup preventions and other things. So once you start to get the hang of the rules, you can see like who's just posting brackets for the heck of it and who's actually being thorough and putting a realistic bracket together for your fantasy dreams of what it's going to look like in March.
Yeah. Is it realistic right now when people talk about the net, people talk about, wins above the bubble, I think is something that you're starting to gain more and more traction. Wins above the bubble. Can you talk us through, what that is? Because again, it's something that's been there, but now all of a sudden you're seeing it take more traction on social media. Kevin, I'll go to you for that first. Is that something you think is really going to take a foothold here in this season?
It's on the team sheet this year for the first time, which means it's absolutely one of the factors that the NCAA is considering in selection. I think that's a great step for college basketball because the quadrant system is really valuable. It gives us a kind of a baseline of like, do you have a lot of good wins? Do you have some bad losses? Whatever. But the concern that a lot of people present, and it's not entirely accurate to say it like this, but the concern would be, okay, you won at number 75. That's now weighted the same as beating number 1, right? That's not entirely true, but when you're doing the blind resumes and things like that, that's how it comes out. So wins above bubble, the simplistic way of describing it is it's providing essentially a point value to every win and every loss that you have. So every result means something different, right? You can, you think about a team like Indiana State last year that was a controversial team. People thought maybe they could get in, maybe they'd get left out. One of the main cases for them was that they were, I think, 10-0 in quadrant 3 games, which people generally write off as, games that don't mean anything, right? They're not in the top 2 quadrants. They're not quality wins, but it's hard to win 10 quad 3 games. And so you can add these kind of incremental points, since theoretically a bubble team wins above bubble essentially is comparing your resume to the average bubble team. The hope would be that a team like an Indiana State that can't schedule as easily can now build a resume, and you can point out and say, hey, look, an average bubble team might not have gone 10-0 in those quad 3 games. It would have been really hard for them to do that, to go on the road to a random Missouri Valley team and win. So that's the goal of it. How much it's used by the committee, we'll see. It's year one. That is very much a learning process, and one of the main kind of question marks that all the bracketologists that are on the show this year will have to grapple with is how much to weigh some of these new factors. But I think if used properly and applied properly, it has a chance to really improve the selection and seeding process.
Well, I think that's a great point, because that's what I was going to go to you for, Rocco, real quick here before we go to break. For a new metric like that you haven't seen on the team sheet yet, how do you try to factor that in? How do you try to balance that with what you already know the committee values?
I think it's a terrific addition, because what ends up happening in the actual committee room, which is really all that matters, is how these decisions get made. At the end of the day, I don't get to be in the room, and neither do any of us on the show. But I've spent my entire career here trying to understand what they care about and why, how the discussion might go, how they might look at teams different ways. And the reality is, when you get to the end, some years the bubble can be very confusing. It's almost like a beauty pageant, and everybody's got their favorite, pick in the beauty pageant, but not everybody can come to a consensus. And that can get very tricky. I think with adding the wins above bubble, it's going to be really important for that, because that is a result-based metric. So it's not like your Ken Pom or your Torvik, where you're trying to predict stuff and it's based on performances. It's just pure and simple wins and losses. Kevin explained it beautifully. Every result. And I think those wins matter. They're going on the road places, and that was one of the things Steve Forbes hasn't been able to do. It doesn't mean as much as a quad 2 or quad 1, of course, but it means something, and it's hard to quantify what it means. And that's one area you can turn to with a team like that and say, see, listen, I told you it matters, and here's a dependable tool that is telling us that's the evidence. So I think it's a really good thing. It's not going to apply to everybody, but it's going to help the Wake Forest and the smaller teams, I think, in some of those cases.
All right, this is Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. We'll be right back on Fielding the 68.
Now that the college basketball season is in full swing, you need to make sure that you have access to the best betting tool on the market, the Rhythm app. Spelled RITHMM, is a data-backed app that uses AI and analytics to identify inefficiencies in betting lines and the player prop market that will allow you, the user, to profit. You can create customized, analytics-driven betting models tailored to your personal preferences as a bettor. Users have access to up-to-the-second against-the-spread data. And if you're like me and you understand pictures better than numbers on a screen, Rhythm's internal trend analysis provides you with the kind of graphs that will allow you to evaluate past results and project future performance in a visual way. Every Division I college basketball team is included in the Rhythm's metrics. Free subscribers to the Field of 68 Daily will get 25% off for a Rhythm subscription. Use the QR code on the screen to sign up or download at the link in the description.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. Access expert-backed predictions for every remaining college basketball game, from rivalries to sleeper matchups. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. Paul Fritschner, Kevin Sweeney, Rocco Miller with you, and I thought that was a good first 20 minutes of the show to set the stage, talk about the best teams in the country, give people an idea of how we're going to go about things here over the next 55 days. But now let's get in to a lot of these teams, probably why a couple hundred people are listening to this right now, the bubble teams. Let's talk about, Rocco, your first four out and who's on the right side of the bubble for right now.
All right, you want to start with the first four in, Paul, then?
Sorry, last four in. Last four in.
Yeah, no problem.
Last
just
four
making
in.
Sure.
Yes.
No worries, brother. All right, so Wake Forest. Hey, we just teased you before the commercial about the Demon Deacons. They've got to win over Michigan. And in the bubble, it's hard to find teams that have, it was on a neutral court. It was in North Carolina, a quasi-home game, but the team sheet calls it a neutral. We have to judge it that way. On resume, they've only lost 4 times. They're all in quad 1. Obviously, not all 4 of those losses were tournament level teams, but they're quad 1 level games, which are challenging, of course, to win. And I think this is one where another great segue, the WAB, like I mentioned, is helping Wake Forest. It's not a tool I'm going to look at for every team. You're really just at the end of the cut line trying to make a case for every team. And I think with Wake Forest, you can make a pretty good case. They get to 7-0 in the quad 3 level. And overall, when you look at their meaningful results, they're an 8-4 team. That's a better meaningful record than a lot of the bubble. And they're trending in the right direction. That part doesn't matter as much, but you're also in January right now, so looking to forecast it out a little bit further. One of the big knocks on them is they can't win on the road, and that's kept them out of the tournament. So the neutral court Michigan win semi helps. Neutral court Minnesota is like, and then at Syracuse, at Virginia Tech, at Miami, all And Miami might fall into quad 4 in a heartbeat because they're awful right now. But my point is they at least have some substance somewhere, and they're going to, of course, have more chances to prove themselves. And this is where I think we're using the resume metrics to help you. It shouldn't be the first place you start, but just to help you out, to reinforce that point. And that's where the wins above bubble has them 36, so pretty cleanly inside of that top 45 I talked about at the start of the show. Next up is Indiana, another controversial one. And the Hoosiers got right with the road win in overtime at Ohio State Friday. And that made them interesting once again, got them a second quad one road win. Of course, those are better wins than Wake Forest. But the problem, of course, for Indiana is they've lost their other 5 in quad one instead of just the 4 losses that Wake has. And Ohio State and Penn State are great quad one road wins, but they're also not in the field. So Indiana's biggest problem is they do not have a win against the projected field, which is a really key measurement picking apart the bubble. But Indiana just good enough, and you go back, look at the resume stuff, they're top 36 in all of them. So I think there's a home here for Indiana in Dayton in the first 4. And then we move on to the next team. That's UCF. And that was one where I thought, okay, they lose by 1 possession to Houston. It's at home. They were barely in my field on Friday. And we went back and redid all the exercise all over again this morning. And they were still right there, still one of the better options. In fact, some of their stuff improved with the 1-point loss to Houston on the performance side, because that's a very impressive thing to do, to only lose by 1 to that team, even though UCF could have won the game. And then you look at the wins at Texas Tech. That aged better with Texas Tech's win over Arizona. And then they have the Texas A&M opening night win. They have a road win at a somewhat solid Arizona State team that's just a little bit off outside on the bubble. They were actually in the field last week. So UCF's top of the resume is really helping them tremendously. Their worst loss is neutral LSU, not anything to pout about. It was an overtime game at a resort in West Virginia, and they've handled all the rest of their business. So UCF's in. And then the last team in this one was really, really difficult for me, but I do still have Pittsburgh in the field. Obviously, we've seen the 4-game losing streak. We saw how frustrated they are after the Florida State loss, and, of course, falling short against Clemson over the weekend. But the reality is they still have a win over West Virginia, a road win at Ohio State, which is in Quad 1A, even though Ohio State's not a team in the field today. They just have no bad as well, similar to UCF in that regard, just without the high-level wins. The WAB and the strength of resume have Pittsburgh on very shaky ground. I just happen to like that just because they have done a little bit on the road, especially their best win easily is on the road. They hang on for me in the field versus those next 4 out.
Kevin,
I'll pause there in
case
surprised?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, Kevin, are you surprised by any of that? Any of those teams in there right now?
I think kind of vibes wise, yeah, right. It feels like the world's already ended for Indiana. You look up and again, as Rocco says, that's why it's so important to sit down and do the exercise, because you sit down and it feels really bleak, and you look at the schedule and you're like, how do we get there? But right now it looks okay, right? Again, would I bet in 3 weeks it looks okay for Indiana? I would not. Like, I don't feel great about the future, but right now I think they look okay. Like, I think the thing that's instructive right now when we're talking about bracketology in January, because that's what we're doing, we're talking 2 months before selection show, is start to look at where teams are now and what the path forward looks like. So like for Pitt, for instance, yes, they're in the field now, and I don't quibble with that on Rocco's side. But they've just lost 4 straight games that were really the good opportunities for them to build a resume in ACC play. At Duke, which is the crown jewel, home Louisville, which is a potential quad 1 game, at Florida State, which is a potential quad 1 game, and home Clemson, who's another tournament team, a potential win against the field. Now you look up, what are the opportunities to fix it if you're Pittsburgh? Really, it's home Carolina, so a home game against a bubble team, at Wake Forest, which right now is right on the edge of even being a quad 1 game. You've got at SMU, you've got at Louisville. Like, it's not a rousing schedule with dozens of opportunities, and now you've lost a couple of those home games. So I just think right now you look at it and say, yeah, Pitt has a chance. And yes, they certainly do if they straighten things out. They were a very good team in November and December, but the way they're playing right now and with the schedule that's left comparative to, again, some of these Big Ten teams, teams in the SEC, teams of the Big 12, the path gets more difficult and the margin for error gets slim. So that's why it's easy to say, it's one result out of 30 when you're in the SEC. When you're in the ACC right now with the lack of other opportunities, it gets scary quick, especially when you lose 4 in a row like the Panthers have.
All right, let's take a look at the consensus last 4 in for fielding the 68. Indiana is still in there. Oklahoma there on the right side of the bubble. UCF as well. And then Maryland makes their way into the field. So 2 of the 4 are the same as yours, Rocco. Oklahoma and Maryland, though, the exceptions to that. Your reaction. Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to ask you about Oklahoma right now because we're going to get to Oklahoma in a minute. But what about Maryland? Kevin Willard's squad. Maryland's had a really tough kind of up and down year this year. If you were asking any Maryland fan in this chat right now, they would kind of similar, Kevin, to what you were just talking about with Indiana. Maryland fans have been extremely frustrated with the season. They're 14-5. They're 4-4 in the Big Ten. They're coming off a home win over Nebraska. They do have that win over UCLA. They have a win over Ohio State. They beat Villanova on a neutral floor. What do you think about the Terps, Rocco?
I have a lot of thoughts about the Terps, and one of the controversial picks. They're the first team out for me. Just a little segue there, because you watch them play and you know the players. They're talented as hell. Top 25 talent team easily, in my opinion. And there's just important boxes that they still haven't even checked. A road win of any kind, don't have one. A 500 or higher record in the top two quadrants, don't have that. They're 4-5. Any kind of quad one win, don't have one yet. So, and that's a little unfortunate because UCLA fell to 34. I get that that's a good win, a tournament level win, and Nebraska's really close to the field as well. So the Terps are right there. I'm just kind of waiting for that game where they finally break through. But then we saw, yesterday I thought a spot where maybe they would smash Nebraska so badly that it would make it even harder to leave them out. But that game was tight. So it's really hard to determine. You're also what I always preach in bracketology as well is you got to watch the teams play. Go back and watch at least the 10, 20-minute highlight reel of each game for these tougher decisions, because that's what the committee does. You got to be able to make sure you're getting the right at-large teams, a little bit of eye test. And if they're struggling at home with Nebraska, that's definitely some warning signs for, not solving all the issues that we've seen when they lost at Washington and have fallen short, like even the at Nebraska Northwestern game earlier last week. So Terps are right there. I think once they're in the bracket, this is like a good opportunity to talk about selecting versus seeding, because they are so freaking dominant in the metrics performance wise. Like right now they're 19th in Torvik, which is on the team sheet this year as well. Ken Palm 23. So it would be very easy to see the Terps just skyrocket from like barely in to an 8 or 7 seed, really. So they remind me a lot of Red standpoint. They just don't have the cachet of Tom Izzo. If they did, I'm not going to make that Michigan State mistake again. So sorry, Maryland, you're not Michigan State from a brand side. I don't make the rules. And that's just where it is today, but that could quickly change. On the Oklahoma front, I think that's the big story of the day. I think Oklahoma belongs in the field based on what we have today. And that's typically how every bracketology has ever gone for me. I'm making an exception this year because the SEC is mathematically in an interesting position. Being such a unprecedented league in terms of what they did in non-conference and being a 16-team league, the simple math says every week everybody plays twice. Somebody has to lose every game. So every night there's 7 losers, 7 winners. So the math says the opportunity to get 12 of the 16 members in almost says there's no chance, unless somehow everybody finishes 8-10 or better, which really hard to see. And Oklahoma, honestly, was the easiest one to pick on. They're off to a 1-4 start. Their one win is home South Carolina. That nothing against the Gamecocks, but that's the easiest analytical win of the entire SEC. It's already in the books. So everything going forward is very analytically easy to kind of predict Oklahoma somewhere around 5-13, 6-12, and I just don't think that's going to get it done in the end. And so Oklahoma, of course, has the chance to start rectifying that, and then they'll easily be in for me. I'm just going to continue to, if all 12 of these teams at the top continue to project as tournament teams, I'm just going to take that 12th team and put them right on the outside looking in, because I think when all the results are in, it's going to be nearly impossible, or in fact impossible, for all 12 to get in. I'm sure Kevin could pick me apart on that, but that's just where I'm at with it. I'm being realistic. And I also want to give more leagues love. I don't want one league taking all of our bids. So that's part of it as well. And until we get to a more mature place in the season, third of the next 4 out, Paul. And Nebraska was in on Friday, lost at Maryland. It just kind of swung things a little bit too much for the Huskers. They have 12 meaningful games played, not counting quad 4. They're 6-6, so you can still take them. But they're also 4-5 in those top 2. They've got an amazing road win at Creighton that's aging well. The UCLA win helps a lot. That's another win over the field. But, just going back and kind of checking in on things, they're just 50th in the strength of resume. The WAB's not especially high on the Huskers at 46. And you could tell they're really, really close to this cutoff line. I just didn't see enough to put them in compared to the other options. And then last but not least, a quick mention of SMU happened earlier. I have the Ponies there. Now, if you were not looking at the resume and you were more of a kind of a lazy forecaster and you just looked at metrics, SMU's in easily. They're 40th in the resume. They're 39th in KenPom. They're inside the top 50 WAB, 41 Torvik. But that's not how these decisions get made, folks. Their best wins right now are LSU and Washington State on neutral courts. And I respect Mr. McMahon and Mr. Riley a lot, but they are not tournament teams, and SMU needs a win over the field. And right now, their best road win is at number 140 Virginia, and that just happened on the 15th. So, again, the Ponies just got to do some more building. Big opportunity tomorrow against Louisville. We'll see how they perform there.
Kevin, the first four out there, any reaction to those four teams from Rocco's first four out?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to dish on the Oklahoma thing because I do think it's an interesting conversation to have longer term. What will the committee do with a team that's 6-12, maybe even 7-11 in the SEC, a historically good SEC? Will especially in Oklahoma's case, a team that accomplished some real stuff in the non-conference, right? I don't want to get too big picture here, but there's been so many conversations about NCAA tournament expansion, and Greg Sankey's kind of go-to line, SEC commissioner, is that he feels like there are teams that have a chance to make a real run. That we're not getting the best teams in the current system. That there's teams that deserve an opportunity to go play in March Madness, and Oklahoma would be sort of the perfect example for him to sell. Right? You have a team that beat Arizona, Louisville, and Michigan on neutral courts in the non-conference, that presumably would get some decent wins in SEC play. Otherwise, they wouldn't get too close to NCAA tournament contention. But if they're on the bubble and they're left out because they go 6-12 in a historically good league, then the conversation starts to be, okay, well, do we need to expand the tournament, whatever? And I think some of those external factors will be sort of interesting to monitor. I don't know yet with Oklahoma. I want to see more. Again, it's easy to lose 4 in a row in SEC play right now, right? You lose a 4-point game to Texas, a 2-point game at A&M against A&M, a very good A&M team that Oklahoma nearly led pretty much the whole way in that game. So my hunch is that things will sort of sort themselves out with the Sooners, but they're a fascinating case because what they accomplished in the non-conference, incredibly impressive. We'll see how the committee values that with what seems likely to be a relatively underwhelming SEC mark.
All right, let's take a look here at the – oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, quick comment. Yeah, I did the math on that, Kevin. So if Oklahoma did finish 6-12 in their specific example, they'd finish 12-12 in meaningful games, and they would finish I'm assuming all these are in the top 2 quads when I say this, but they would finish 3 games below 500 in the top 2 quadrants. So that would put them at – today they're 4-4, so that would put them at 9-12 in those most 21 important games. So again, they're huge those opportunities. You're going to pick up good wins. What they did non-conference was sensational. I concur. However, at the end of the day, are you a successful team if you're 9-12? They found out last year. They were 12-12 in meaningful games last year, got left at the altar. Some of that had to do with bid steals, but it was also because, hey, you guys had all these chances. You went 4-12 in your quad one. And I'm sorry if Oklahoma gets picked on again this year. That would be their direct, exact situation if they finish 6-12. Also, the other team to pay attention to is Vanderbilt. I thought Vanderbilt was clearly in today, but they did not have as good of a non-conference resume as Oklahoma. And those are the two closest to the 11-12 spots today.
I'm just going to say I was just sorry, Paul. I'm just going to say if somehow Oklahoma's in the first 4 out again, that they got to rename that like the Porter Mosier first 4 out, because that would be 3 times in 4 years that they're in the first 3 or 4 teams out of the field. So here's hoping that the Sooners have a little more luck, because right now they've had no fun on Selection Sunday.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, let's take a look at the consensus first 4 out here real quick. The fielding the 68's first 4 out as a group, it's Nebraska, Drake, SMU, and Wake Forest. Drake, anything there with Drake, Rocco?
Yeah, I have Drake in the field, so I must be against the grain with the other guys. And listen, with Vanderbilt comfortably in, that's Vanderbilt's Drake's best friend. Drake beat Vanderbilt by 11 in Charleston to win the tournament. And that's why Drake's relevant in the at-large picture. Now, I know Lucas is one of our guys, and he probably has Drake as his champion, so he might be out of this conversation. But I just think there's a lot to love about their resume. They picked up the Road Bradley win, which is also quad one, and overall they've got the 2 losses, sure, and you can't do anything about those losses. One of them falls in quad 3, and that's where they get really interesting because that was Murray State at home. And then the other interesting thing is their 303rd non-conference strength of schedule, but the committee put DeVries's Drake team in the very last team in the field when they had a 306. So we've already seen this exact team. And part of the rationale was they don't get the opportunities. Nobody wants to play Drake, blah, blah, blah. And they actually have 2 technical road wins in the top 2 quads against Kansas State, which even though it's Kansas City, they hosted the game, counts as a true road win, which was kind of crazy to me. And the resume stuff backs it up. 38th in resume, 43rd in wins above bubble. I feel very good about, especially with Vanderbilt succeeding, I feel very good about putting Drake in the field today.
Real quick here, are there any other teams, you look at, the SEC and the Big 12 have gotten a lot of the attention, obviously, but then you mentioned this at the top of the show, the ACC and the Big East, and what's kind of left over for them. I mean, we're talking about a Wake Forest team that has 1 loss in the ACC right now, and they're sitting squarely on the bubble. And you're talking about a Big East that feels pretty comfortable about UConn and Marquette and St. John's, and then what beyond them? Can they get that 4th and 5th team into the NCAA tournament this year? Do they have the wins to be able to do that? Where are some of those other teams, Rocco? Are there other teams knocking on the door?
Oh, absolutely. So, to start with those 2 conferences, we talked about SMU and we talked about Wake Forest and Pittsburgh. I mean, so there's 3 ACCs right there flirting with the bubble. And, you would hope if you're – and North Carolina, quite honestly, is really close to the bubble as well. They were my last number 10 seed today. So between the 4 of them, if you're an ACC person, you're certainly pulling that at least 3 get in. That's how I would have it today. They do have 3 in today. But the Ponies are really interesting because they only – I think it's because they're new to the league, but they only got to play Duke once. They only got to play Carolina once. They already lost both those games. So they don't get to play them again unless they get them in the ACC tournament. And, of course, championship week, you don't want to count on anything there because a lot of the committee work gets done during that same time. So I think SMU's in they've got to be almost perfect zone right now. They get Pittsburgh they'll get Pittsburgh in a couple weeks, Louisville tomorrow, and there's not a lot left. I think they only got Clemson one time on their schedule as well. So that's where my concern is for that league. With the Big East, Creighton's win at UConn I think was big for the league because I think we'd all agree UConn's floor is still really high. They're still really nowhere near the bubble. And Creighton's pretty safe right now. And, of course, starting to peak like they do in January almost every year. And that's big because St. John's has really solidified themselves. Marquette's there at the top. And now you got Xavier with the big road win. Xavier's starting to get a little interesting, Paul. I know you're very curious. Not quite in that next 8. I think I have them like 9th or 10th. And if Xavier keeps playing well, they'll continue to get interesting. And they have a top-of-the-resume piece of gold that most bubble teams just quite honestly won't get throughout the course of the year and more opportunities. So I think that's the pathway. Villanova, if they can pick up some big wins, is there as well. I do think like your Providences and below are probably too much to ask for at this point. But as you see with Xavier last week, things can change in a week. So that's what I'd say for those 2 leagues. And then overall, some other teams I wanted to just mention quickly are Santa Clara just won at Gonzaga. They're still all over the map because they played a ridiculous non-conference like they do. Shout out to Jason Ludwig for that, the assistant coach. But with the road win at Gonzaga, they still get St. Mary's twice. They still get Gonzaga at home. The WCC's got beef in the middle now, fellas. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't know how it's going to play out. If they all beat up on each other, they're only getting 2 bids. But if somebody like a Santa Clara can ride that big win into more big wins, there'll be a lot of good cases. And I was really blown away because the KPI, an overlooked metric, and I'll be honest, I overlook it a lot. The KPI says Santa Clara is 36 today. That's interesting. That gets you a committee conversation. They're just kind of, off the radar still a little bit. They're not in the next 8 out, but once you get those big road wins, you get interesting really fast. Also on that list, Cincinnati and Arizona State from the Big 12. They just played each other. Cincinnati got the home win, but both those teams will need another road win to get back on the good side of the bubble. Keep your eye on both of them. And then Texas is in that SEC bubble pickle. Not looking good for them long term, just the way they perform. But obviously they have a ton of talent and they can get some big wins quickly. They can get back in there. And Iowa was just in last week, took a couple losses, clearly out now. But Iowa, if they can figure it out, good weeks, they'll be right back in the mix. So that's who I would say is knocking on the door.
All right, this is Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. We'll be right back talking North Carolina a little more. We're talking Gonzaga, taking questions too. If you have some questions, put them in the chat. We'll be right back.
If you haven't heard by now, we have partnered with BetMGM for the season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets. Go download the BetMGM app and use the code FIELD today.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm. Combine Rhythm's analytics with Field of 68's expert insights for the ultimate college hoops experience. Don't wait. Download Rhythm today and transform how you bet, bracket, and enjoy college basketball. All right, let's talk SEC hoops, fellas, because we talked about Oklahoma. We talked about the strength of this league this year, how good this league has been, not just this season, but historically. Kevin, give us your take just to start off this segment about how you kind of view the SEC as a whole, what you're looking at them here out of the last 2 months of the season, and maybe what they can do as we look forward toward the tournament as far as getting as many teams as we think they can get in.
Yeah, I think it has a chance to be historic, not just in terms of the number of bids, but also, the top tier teams, right? You're talking about almost half the league at least being in some conversation for one of those top 4 protected seeds. That should cause a lot of headaches for the folks in the committee room here over the next couple of months as they try to figure out how to slot all these teams in. They may have to bend or break some of the normal principles that they really, really abide by. But yeah, look, I think the main cap on the SEC's bids this year will be just teams not winning enough in the league. Like everyone's from a non-conference perspective, I think you could make a case that everyone set themselves up relatively well. Even a team like Arkansas that seems very down and out at the moment got a real neutral court win over Michigan that should have had some real might and no bad losses in that non-conference slate. It's just, are they going to win enough? And right now it looks like they won't, but rip off 3 straight and you're going to look up and all of a sudden say, okay, here comes Arkansas. So I think that 11 to 12 bids feels very possible, and there will be teams that are left out that in other conferences would look very competitive and potentially could have played their way into the tournament.
Rocco, the SEC, what are we thinking?
Couple of things. Well, first of all, from a bracketing standpoint, and Kevin touched on it momentarily there, it's a little tricky. In the top 16, there's a rule for every league. You can't have 2 teams in the same region unless you have 5 or more. So you would automatically go to the empty region as you go through 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I think right now we have 7 SEC teams in the top 16. So you're going to see multiple teams in the same region from the SEC at the very top of the pecking order per region. So that's been pretty interesting. But the process is you would still fill out the bracket 1 through 4. So I think the top right now, of course, would be Auburn at the top with Alabama next, then Tennessee, then Florida. So those 4 would all be in separate regions. and then you slot the rest how you would normally do it according to geography. But when you get down bracket and you add in the other 4 to 5 teams, I'm saying 4 because I'm sticking up my 11. But the committee also has a lot of other bracketing rules in terms of, they also don't want you to have a rematch in the second round if they can help it. That one's a little looser, but certainly no rematches in the first round. So bracketing right now with all these SEC teams has been very tricky. Obviously, it's a testament to how strong that league is and how much talent. And obviously, they're spending a lot in NIL. They're getting a good return on investment, if you ask me. Those things are actually a little more than they first felt. I first felt like it was going to be impossible to build a bracket. That ended up not being true. We can get through this. So all good and pretty exciting for Greg Sankey, no doubt.
Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to make sure that we hit on today, and we've talked a lot about Indiana, but I think there are some other big brands when you think of college basketball and you think of this bracket this year. There are a couple of big brands that kind of have some interesting resumes. One's North Carolina, one's Gonzaga. I'm going to start with Gonzaga because Gonzaga is a team that just lost to Oregon State and then lost to Santa Clara. Now all of a sudden you're kind of looking at Mark Few's Zags right now and you're thinking to yourself, hold on a second. Do they have enough? I mean, they were just a top 20 team, and now all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, what do we do about Gonzaga here going forward? Kevin, where do you land here on the Zags after this last week?
Yeah, it's an interesting position because they have a huge divide between what their resume says they are and what the quality metrics like a KenPom would say they should be, or what they are as a quality of team. And I think the other thing that's really challenging with Gonzaga is that a lot of the wins we thought, at the time were big wins have not aged so great. I mean, even just this past weekend, you blow out, the blowout went over Baylor that they had on opening night. Well, Baylor loses to TCU. Baylor's sliding down the seed list. San Diego State on the road, that's a big win. Well, here comes San Diego State losing to UNLV, that potentially putting them at least closer to the bubble. Arizona State has fallen off some in Big 12 play. Indiana is struggling. So the wins that you were counting on in November to buoy this Gonzaga team don't necessarily have the same weight that they used to, and now you have 6 losses on the resume. So I'm not quite ready to sound the alarm bells of like, oh, Gonzaga is going to miss the tournament, or they're going to be in the first 4. But it's not impossible that we wind up with them kind of sweating it on Selection Sunday if they can't right the ship. Because as Rocco alluded to earlier, the WCC is better than it's been. Right, there are more games where a team can go beat this Gonzaga group. You get Oregon State and St. Mary's here before the end of the month. Still have San Francisco, who's a very good team, at Washington State. That'll be a tricky game with a big-time crowd, you would think, out in Pullman. Second game with St. Mary's at Santa Clara, at San Francisco to close the year. Like, the good thing is those are wins that would matter, and Gonzaga could beef its resume right back up and be in that top 4 to 6 seed conversation very quickly. But lose a couple of those games, and all of a sudden things could get dicey.
Rocco?
Yeah, I cover the league, so I know this team very well. They're not defending right now. That's the basketball part of it, and Santa Clara exposed them, had a red hot night too. But they lost twice last week. Oregon State as well in overtime, and plenty of opportunities to win that game, and they didn't. So there's alarm bells ringing on the court, and there's alarm bells ringing, Paul, on the resume. The strength of resume right now is in the 50s, which is kind of scary, and 49th in the wins above bubble, our new favorite toy. So, it's not going to keep Gonzaga out because they have a primetime national schedule that got them a road win at San Diego State. We have Indiana in the field. That's a 16-point neutral court win. Arizona State's relevant. Washington State's relevant. So their wins are still fine. Obviously, the big one over Baylor, they hammered them by almost 40. And, if they get back, if they fix their defense, I think they have the best possible schedule after what just happened. They have a bye on Thursday, so they only play once this week, and they get home Portland Saturday. That gives them a whole week to just clear their mind. It's almost like going to a retreat meditation. We might see a whole new Zags team by the time they get to that St. Mary's game. And then, of course, with bracketology, if your resume is okay and you're in, this team's getting – like last year, I think it blew a lot of people away that Gonzaga went all the way from a bubble team just weeks before the tournament to a 5 seed. you could see that repeat itself because they're still a top 15 performance team.
Now, what about North Carolina? What are we doing with the Tar Heels right now? Because they're 12-7, they're 5-2 in the ACC. Just as far as the bare metrics go, they have that neutral court win over UCLA. They beat Dayton, but Dayton has significantly fallen off. I mean, the Flyers looked like a shoe-in NCAA tournament team, and then they dropped 3 straight in the A10. North Carolina just lost to Stanford at home. They have a loss outside of that. Their 6 losses have come all to KenPom top 30 teams. 5 of them have come in the top 13. So where are the Tar Heels right now, Rocco?
On the bubble for sure. Definitely on the bubble. I think the one thing that got them back into the 10 seeds for me is just their performance stuff is a lot better than most of the bubble. Their BPI is 26 and safely in the low 30s in KenPom. So we know performance-wise, if they are, in fact, one of the best 37 at-large teams, once they're in, then when you seed them, they kind of trickle up to a 10. But I think they're in very hot water. Like their 6 hardest games, they lost them all. Those are the only 6 they played in Quad 1A. The neutral court win over UCLA is the only win over the field now because you referenced the Dayton loss. If SMU can emerge, they can get a second win there. And, of course, they'll play Duke twice. Those are huge piece of gold opportunities on either court. And some other games with your Pittsburghs. And they play Wake on the road tomorrow. If they lose that game tomorrow, it would be very easy to put them out of the field by Wednesday. That's how close it is today. So they've got a lot of work to do. And, they're just barely getting by is my best assessment.
All right. Fellas, any other thoughts? I know we talked a lot about Indiana. Is there anything that we didn't cover with Indiana or Gonzaga or North Carolina with those 3 teams, or maybe as a group? Anything with them that you're noticing as a trend? Any just general comments on those before we move on to some fan questions?
The one thing I would say, Paul, and I think this is the type of thing that's important to monitor as we go, is so much of conference bid counts winds up being the teams at the top of their respective leagues hand out a couple quality wins to teams that need them on the bubble, right? If you are a Big East fan, if you're Val Ackerman right now, you could not be more thrilled with the weekend you just had because 2 of your best teams in UConn and Marquette gave out monster road wins to Xavier and Creighton, 2 of the teams that are at least floating around that tournament conversation. I think you compare that to the ACC, where I think everyone's going to have a real tough time beating Duke. I mean, that might be the difference in terms of bid counts at the end of the year. So that's something to watch. I think, again, when we're talking 8 weeks ahead, yes, like we're looking at the snapshot time now, but also thinking ahead of how can we build out these resumes. A big part of that is who can beat the top of their respective conferences. And I thought this weekend we got a little bit of a taste of what that might look like. And again, we'll see, does the top of the Big Ten get beat up, right? Can people knock off Purdue? Can they knock off Michigan State? Can they knock off Illinois? Illinois showing some cracks, but those other teams have been pretty darn good. That will be the interesting thing to monitor as we're looking at bid counts come Selection Sunday.
All right, let's take a look here at some fan questions. And the first one, Clemson right now, they've won 6 of their last 7 games. They're sitting at 15-4 on the season. They're 26th on KenPom. They've had a very good season. Brad Brownell, guess what? He's had another good year there for Clemson. Now, the question is, can they close the year and get into the NCAA tournament? Rocco, how comfortable is Clemson right now?
They're plenty safe in. I mean, I think they're like a 7 seed, maybe even a 6. I'll build my bracket tomorrow morning. We had a rush with travel today, but I mean, you're looking at 2 Quad 1A wins. They have the Kentucky home win. Road Pittsburgh still matters a lot. That's still the last team in for me. And then supplement that with the neutral San Francisco, neutral Penn State wins. So that they've done a lot of solid to be in this position. However, in the ACC, that can change quickly. Look at what happened to Pittsburgh last week, as an example. I don't know. I think they'll have to play Carolina, Duke. Obviously, they'll either go one way or the other. If they can get the big win at Duke or with Duke, that changes everything in terms of their safety. If they don't get that big win, then they're going to be vulnerable against anybody else because nobody else is in the top 24 in the ACC, like I said at the beginning.
Wisconsin, they have 2 road losses back in December, and that was right after that loss that at home to Michigan. But since then, they haven't lost. 7 straight wins right now for Wisconsin. They're coming off a big one over USC out in LA on Saturday. How high can Wisconsin climb, Rocco? What's their maybe max on a seed?
Yeah, well, the way it shows up in the sheet is they can actually still play. They're going to play a lot more big games. So I had them worthy of being in what we call the protected seed zone. That's the top 16 when you see that reveal in February, 1 through 4 in every region. They just missed that cut. And part of the reason why at this point in time is they don't have a road win against the field. That road win at USC was really impressive. They've had some other really good road wins, but none of those teams are projected tournament field teams. So you need that to be a top 16 in most cases, especially theirs. And they're also just 2 and 3 in the quad 1. If you want to be in that superior group, which I think the play on the court represents, they're going to just have to get one of those big time road wins in the Big Ten. Your Oregon, your Illinois, your Michigan State level, and that will change a lot of things for the Badgers to keep climbing. Obviously, they don't have enough good yet to feel safe. So if the Badgers have a bad couple of weeks, they're vulnerable to falling all the way out at some point. I don't see that happening, but we have so much time to go, so you just don't know.
Kevin, any thoughts on the Badgers?
Yeah, I think they've definitely flown under the radar. Again, looking for those top end wins. Again, part of that's just the schedule. I think you feel good about that Arizona win, which is aged nicely. You worried after the way they started the year with that, would that continue to look as good as it once did? It looks to be kind of on the upswing again. But yeah, I mean, look, defining stretch mid-February at Purdue, home Illinois, home Oregon, 1 game against Washington, and then at Michigan State. Like, that's where the money will be made. If Wisconsin can win those, they'll be in the Big Ten title mix, and they'll be certainly in that top 4 seed range. I'm not ready to say they could push towards the 1 line, but that top of the Big Ten, and that I think there'll be a lot of Big Ten teams in that low, bottom half of the 2 seed down to the 5 or 6, and Wisconsin certainly belongs in that conversation.
All right, last chat question here for you, Rocco. We look at a team like Louisville that now has won 8 straight games. They have a win over North Carolina. They've beaten Clemson. They've already beaten Pitt. They lost a few of their marquee games back earlier in the season, a couple of losses in November that they could have picked up. Of course, the one to Tennessee that Pat Kelsey talked about the other day felt like that was an eye-opening experience for him. I thought it was interesting listening to Pat after that game talk about the learning experience that Tennessee loss brought him and this Louisville team and just what it meant to beat top-quality competition and how they've responded to that. And now all of a sudden you've seen Louisville rip off these 8 straight wins. What do you think this Louisville team can do here? How high can they rise, given the fact that they don't play teams like North Carolina, Duke? They're not playing those top ACC teams left on their schedule. They're not going to have another opportunity against Duke to really, get that maybe signature win that they could look for. How high can they get?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm looking at their schedule right now. At SMU tomorrow, you could argue is their toughest game left in the regular season. Their other road games are NC State, Notre Dame, G-Tech, Boston College, Stanford. Stanford's home. So, yeah, and Pittsburgh's a potential tournament opponent. This is a challenging stretch for Louisville, in my opinion. A different kind of challenge, right? Like, it's challenging to go play the big dogs for the obvious reasons. But I think it's also it's almost like a Memphis schedule where everybody's gunning for you, and if you fall to any of them, it's just a black eye. Not a lot to gain and a long way to fall is the way I would say it for the rest of Louisville's schedule. Having said that, what I've noticed the last couple of weeks is every time I refresh the board, Louisville keeps climbing and climbing. They've made their way all the way to 26 this morning. Second best ACC team on the board, a safe 7 seed. And again, if Louisville does pass those really tough psychological challenges of just winning and winning and winning against all these mediocre teams, all they're going to do is watch teams around them lose. And I know because they're not going to add a lot more weight with a big win anywhere. I don't know how high they can get, but they might get so solid and have such a gaudy record in that example that you could see them maybe getting all the way to a 3 seed if it was, right now they're 14-5. If they finish the year with 6 losses, I mean, hard to ignore a big brand school like Louisville, ACC conference. At that point, they'd probably be second place, maybe even first place in the ACC. That's probably a 3 seed. So I'll say that's the absolute max. But otherwise, the way they're playing is phenomenal. But I do think it's going to be mentally challenging to get up for all these mediocre teams. And they're more than college basketball history teaches us, there's probably a slip up somewhere.
Yeah, I was just going to say, could you imagine a 3 seed Louisville after everything that program has gone through over the last couple of seasons? Just to even have that conversation, right? Just to even sit here and be able to say that on January 20th.
I'm looking at them as a 7, and it still looks weird. So yeah, the 3 would be insane.
I mean, Kevin, given how bad Louisville was over the last 2 and 3 seasons, to now be talking about them, not only safely in the tournament right now, but how high can they get? How about that for this Cardinals team?
It's an unreal turnaround, and I'll say this. The UTEP and the Eastern Kentucky games, both in December, when they were down on their luck, they were dealing with all these injuries, you felt like the season was over. Like, they're struggling in these bye games, but you had to stay alive. You had to stay alive. And that's what they did. They found a way not to take that quad 3 or quad 4 home loss that could derail their resume, break their spirit. They found a way to win those games and have gotten more and more comfortable and have started to roll here. And now they're playing, to me, like a top 25 caliber team. And that's been a huge turnaround. Again, they have some opportunities to screw it up here over the next couple weeks, but also some opportunities to stack the win column. And look, I mean, the one thing we talked about earlier with the wins above bubble, that should theoretically help a little bit for a team like a Louisville or a team like a Memphis, right? These teams that are playing these soft conference schedules. It's frustrating that you're not getting those quad 1, quad 2 wins, but if nothing else, you should be incrementally helping yourself a little by little. And as Rocco said, you just keep waking up, refreshing the numbers, and Louisville looks better and better.
All right, fellas, last thing here. Is there any game or games, I guess, that you're looking to watch here over the next few days? Just going forward, there is going to be another Fielding the 68 on Friday. This is going to be a Monday and Friday show here going forward. So over the next few days, are there games that you're keeping an eye on? Are there, just a few things that you can look for before Friday?
Yeah, Paul, I'll jump in. Bracketology-wise, probably the only time we have to comment on it. Otherwise, the country is awesome. Watch all 31 leagues and don't stop. We got North Carolina A&T here hosting Hampton tonight. It's going to be awesome. The band's there only a couple times a year. I'll be there. It's going to be rocking. Really awesome game for the CAA and for the holiday today. So watch them all. But for Bracketology, I'll start with the bubble because that's always the most critical. Maryland has a monster week. They go to Illinois, which is just a grand slam if they can find a way to win that game on the road. And a big one at Indiana, a pure bubble matchup. And the one thing Maryland needs is any kind of road win. And, of course, those are both safely into quad 1. All those things I said about the Terps earlier, they would help us be able to breathe. And you would see Maryland skyrocket by next Monday up the board. So just a critical week for them right in front of them. And then, of course, Indiana themselves hosting Maryland. I would also call out this Oklahoma team. Just looking for SEC wins, right? Like Kevin did a good job talking about how awesome their non-conference was, but they have looked shaky in the league, 1-4 so far. They go to Arkansas. Arkansas has got that 0-5 so far. I think Arkansas has got to play somebody before that. But that's a road opportunity, quad 1. It'd be really hard to ignore Oklahoma if they win that game. So big opportunity for them. And I would also say, Nebraska, they're trying to fight their way back in. Huge opportunity Sunday at Wisconsin. Now, if they get that, I think they're safely back in. However, you can't overlook USC on Wednesday. USC's been really kind of all over the place. Not sure what USC team you're going to get in Lincoln Wednesday. But if they somehow go 2-0 this week, I think you'll see the Huskers back in. Those are all good bubble games to really focus on. And we've talked a lot about the importance of SMU hosting Louisville tomorrow. Very big game. And then on the top end of the bracket, Tennessee's got a monster week. They host Mississippi State tomorrow night, another big-time heavyweight fight. And you want to talk about heavyweight fights, Paul? Talk about Saturday, Tennessee at Auburn. I'm sure Field of 68 is going to be all over it. Two number 1 seeds going at it down in the jungle. Tennessee. Yeah, that makes sense. I love it. Oh, thanks for the invite, by the way. I'll join you. But yeah, Tennessee at Auburn. If Tennessee wins the game, it shakes things up. They get the best money. That'd be the best win in the country right now at number 1. So big one to watch. Wake Forest is barely in. They're hosting Duke. Duke doesn't get many chances to get road wins that matter. For them, it's a good chance to get a road win that matters. And then Iowa State has a couple interesting bubble games. Hosting UCF, I think the Cyclones are fine hosting them, but UCF's barely in. They're hungry, coming off that 1-point loss to Houston. That could be interesting. And then a sneaky one at Arizona State. If the Sun Devils can upset the Cyclones, see them back in the bracket next week.
Sweeney, what are you looking for this week?
Yeah, that Wake Carolina game feels outsized importance in terms of a January college basketball game. Like both teams could really, really use it. Wake, especially on their home court, got to find a way. And then, as Rocco sort of alluded to, watching those bottom of the SEC teams, whether it's Oklahoma, Texas gets Mizzou at home, like we can start crossing teams off pretty quick if Texas is losing at home to Missouri. Right, those are the types of games you have to have if you want to be in the conversation. So, big 3 days ahead. Pretty monster matchups, really across the board. And excited about it. We'll see y'all Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about the SEC. I mean, even a team like Vanderbilt, who's at Alabama, then home against Kentucky, then at Oklahoma, Florida. I mean, all these quad 1 games. You just look at the quad 1s here going forward. Vanderbilt's about to go on a absolutely brutal next couple of weeks, but just
Bama,
brutal.
Right?
Yeah. At Bama, and then home against Kentucky, at Oklahoma, at Florida. All right, we've been on here for over an hour. We appreciate each and every one of you listening to the first Fielding the 68 of this season. He's Rocco Miller. That's Kevin Sweeney. I'm Paul Fritschner. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. We'll be back on Friday for another episode of Fielding the 68 presented by Rhythm.